Ridge Racer 7 isn't really just a racing game. It feels like an experience that's a unique event every time that I play the game. Ridge Racer 7 was one of the few options you had for the launch title for the PS3 if you decided to shell out
$599 US.
It was an extensive remake of Ridge Racer 6. Back in the 2000s, Ridge Racer games signified a new console launch, and they were usually a technological showcase of what the console could do. Ridge Racer 5 came out in 2000s for the PS2 launch, and while it definitely looks dated today, it was absolutely groundbreaking at the time seeing a 3D racing game with graphics that looked like that. 5 years later, Ridge Racer 6 came out as a launch title for the Xbox 360. Ridge Racer 6 was a pretty big departure from the previous games. Ridge Racer has always had a strange handling model, but Ridge Racer 6 departed in the fact that it was pretty easy to perform drifts now, and anyone could really pick up the game and play right away. The problem was mastering how the game actually handled how you get nitrous in the game, which is how you get the fastest lap times. It introduced this strangely addicting gameplay mechanic where in order to build boost, you would have to hit the nitrous right before you entered a turn, and then when the nitrous ran out, you started drifting. This would allow you to keep building up nitrous chains and allow you to keep going faster and faster throughout the lap. While these mechanics have been present in other racing games, I've never seen them come together in a way like Ridge Racer's strung them together. Ridge Racer also uses probably one of the most literal definitions of brake to drift I've ever seen. Essentially, before a corner, you just let go of the gas and tap on the brakes slightly, and your car immediately swings out into a perfect drift where you just have to control the angle. While this sounds quite boring, actually getting good at it is really challenging, and some of the later cars in the game are actually a lot harder to control than the starter cars, so it does develop a bit of a muscle memory in order to actually drive the cars properly. So, if Ridge Racer 6 was a launch title for the 360 and established a lot of these new mechanics, how did they change up Ridge Racer 7 only a year later for the PS3? Well, it's kind of misleading because Ridge Racer 7 is more like Ridge Racer 6.5. The best way that I can describe this game's development is kind of like if a modding team took a big AAA racing game that didn't have a lot of features and they just kept adding more and more and more until the theme broke at the seams. While Ridge Racer 6 established the formula for how the game actually plays, Ridge Racer 7 adds a lot more content and makes a lot of gameplay additions that aren't obvious at a first glance. The first thing that I noticed when switching between the two games is the gameplay speed. In Ridge Racer 7, all the cars seem to go 20 or 30 miles an hour faster on average, which makes the game speed feel a lot higher. There's also a vehicle customization system, where you can change out body kits and performance parts of your car. One thing that really shocked me is the body kits in this game aren't just a visual difference, they actually change how your car drives. This combined with the performance parts system makes almost an endless combination of how your car actually feels to drive. If you don't like how a car drives, you can certainly make it understeer or oversteer more to your liking, or have a higher top speed, or have more acceleration. This is a pretty vital part of the game, and it wasn't actually introduced in Ridge Racer 6 at all, so I can imagine a lot of people who bought Ridge Racer 6 when it was brand new feel pretty gypped when this game actually came out. That's not to say Ridge Racer 6 isn't worth playing though. Once I got done with this game and I realized that there isn't any more content or any sequels to really satisfy that itch anymore, I went back and played Ridge Racer 6 and actually had a really good time with it despite all the drawbacks and downgrades. There was actually a couple things that I preferred in this 6th game. I thought that career mode progression was actually handled a bit better, as you get to choose what races you like to do in a hex grid style system. This game, on the other hand, has you go through a couple events in a linear fashion, and while there's nothing wrong with that, it kind of removed the sense of exploration I felt in the 6th game. I also feel like the 6th game had some songs that were absolutely bangers, and I wish they would have returned in this game, but sadly, they sold them back as DLC. I think it's absolutely crazy that this game's about to be 20 years old, and there's still DLC available that you can download right now. Other things that Ridge Racer 7 added were obviously new cars, new tracks, a completely new soundtrack, and a new storyline, if you can even call it that. Ridge Racer Type 4 was the only Ridge Racer game that I've ever played that has a storyline, and every game after that seems to just follow the generic racing game story where you're some no-name racer making his way up through the ranks and you're trying to win the Grand Prix. Another massive improvement they made was they made the game run at 1080p. This is actually the first console game ever made to run at 1080p, and it did so while running at 60 frames per second. This is pretty impressive because there are console games struggling to do this today. So, how does it actually feel to play Ridge Racer 7? I think the best way that I can describe this game is ethereal. The menus, the song choices, the way the cars look, the voice acting, everything about this game just puts you in like a dreamlike state. All of the environments and art in this game genuinely look like what I thought a utopia would look like 20 years ago. The environmental variety is really good too. You have maps that take place around temples that look like it came from an Aztec tribe. You have downtown city courses that look like a rave when you're actually driving around at 250 miles an hour. You'll drive through caves that go under waterfalls, and this might be the only game I've ever played that makes a dockyard and an industrial site actually look pretty. I also really appreciate the verticality in this game. It's pretty common to go up or down 10 stories at a time, and it really makes the tracks feel a lot more alive. And this kind of extends to the entire game. The whole game feels alive. Everything from the menus to the music to the UI design, everything feels like it was perfectly crafted. There's no dirt, there's no trash, there's no rust anywhere. Everything in this universe feels like it's perfectly 100% pristine. This is actually a little ironic though, if you look into the lore of this game and realize which universe it takes place in. This game was published by Bandai Namco, and they thought it'd be a great idea to combine the universe of Ridge Racer and Ace Combat. I mean, think about it, right? You're a sanctioned racer, having a bunch of races in some closed tracks that are set up, and there's a Grand Prix every year, and it's like this major thing where you got sponsorships and a bunch of people investing time and money into this. Meanwhile, possibly within the same continent, there's a bunch of fighter pilots trying to uncover a massive conspiracy. It's pretty funny to me, and I don't really think they really utilize this in either of the games. I played through Ace Combat 7, and I don't think I ever heard any of the pilots mentioning that they want a car from Ridge Racer when they retire. So, how does Ridge Racer actually play? I remember that I actually bought Ridge Racer 7 for a couple dollars back in 2010 on the same day that I bought Gran Turismo 5. I remember I got home and I ended up playing the game for about an hour or so, and I didn't actually enjoy the game that much. I went back and played Gran Turismo 5 and I had a lot more fun playing that at the time, so I didn't even look back at this game. That was a huge regret though, as I was missing out on one of the best arcade racers that I've ever played. Ridge Racer 7 doesn't really play like a traditional racing game where you have to worry about car control and how your car is actually going down the road. The main thing you have to worry about is how you're going to drift around a corner and how you're going to get nitrous. It can actually be a little disconcerting the first time you play this game and you actually start controlling some of the vehicles. It's not driving how you would imagine it. It's really detached, and despite the cars looking like they can actually move a million miles an hour, they're actually really sluggish and they're pretty hard to change directions in. Despite this being probably the most arcadey racing game I've ever played, the cars feel vastly different from each other. The starting class in the game, which is Class 4, has a couple different cars in it, and all of them drive so differently from each other, I almost can't believe the variety. Two of the cars feel pretty similar, the Profetti and the Kamada, but the rest of the cars feel like they all have their own complete distinct personality. This does lead me into one of my only problems with this game, and that's that some of the cars are just straight up worse than some others. As a general rule of thumb, the default cars in a class are usually the ones that make the most sense to drive, and every other car in the class just feels like some insane variation. Now, that's not to say it's all bad. A lot of the cars are a really good alternative, and some of them have like different top speeds or different responsiveness in the handling, so if you don't like how a car drives, you can certainly find one that suits your taste, but some of the cars are just a straight up downgrade. I feel like all the dynamic drift cars in the game feel really bad to drive, and even though you can get good at driving them, it feels like you're always walking on eggshells rather than just enjoying the game for what it is. Now, the actual drifting in this game is perfect. Every time I found myself linking myself into multiple corners, I found myself going into almost a trance-like state. Once you get to some of the later stages in the game, some of the faster cars in this game require absolute pinpoint reflexes because you're going around corners at over 230 miles an hour. The game does a great job of easing you into this though, as the first couple races in the game are more like a tutorial, and the machines are split up into various categories, so you have category 4 through 1, with 1 being the fastest. The first part of the game is probably why I dropped it all those years ago. The problem is, when you're in the category 4 machines, your top speed is limited to about 150 miles an hour, and while this is really fast in a normal car, doing it in a game where you have perfect control and never actually have to worry about braking feels really slow, and since the tracks are pretty wide open and are usually 4 lanes or more wide, you never really have to worry about crashing as once you get hang of the controls. Once you get to the Category 2 machines though, it feels like the game completely changes. It goes from being a somewhat mundane arcade racing game to one that's absolutely adrenaline filled. The speeds jump pretty high, so now you're going about 180 miles an hour, and going around corners at this speed for the first time is genuinely scary in my opinion. One thing that I noticed about each category of vehicle was that your nitrous timing was completely different. What do I mean by this? Well, before you come up to a corner, you want to time it so that your nitrous runs out the second you actually hit the start of the corner so that you can build boost the entire time. But when you go up to a much faster class of vehicle, your timing is completely off because you're traversing the track a lot faster. When you're going through the Grand Prix in a linear fashion, it makes sense, but when you're jumping between a Category 2 and a Category 4 car for some of the events in the game, it can be a little jarring realizing how much different your timings have to be. I do like this though, and I think it adds a lot of depth to the gameplay. Once you get good at timing your nitrous and you start doing multiple corners in a row with full nitrous, it becomes addicting and I almost couldn't get enough of it. When you hear the sound truck pumping in the background and you actually get some of the drifts executed the way that you want to, it almost feels like you're entering this ethereal trance-like state where you're just focusing on the game and everything else just becomes white noise. On the other hand, it was almost equally frustrating when you mistime a corner and your nitrous isn't charging properly and you start losing some actual ground in the harder events. I will say throughout the actual GP in the game, it's not really a problem, but in the extreme battles, nitrous timing becomes a crucial mechanic and you have to understand how to do it in order to get some of the best lap times. You have alternatives though. You can choose a different type of nitrous where you can actually charge the nitrous while you're drifting, and this feels a lot more intuitive in my opinion. The problem is, if you mess up a corner or you're not going fast enough to actually get enough nitrous to recharge your bar, you just can't get any for the rest of the race. You're completely locked out and there's nothing else you can do. You just have to get lucky and hope you can draft somebody to the finish line. There's also an auto-charge nitrous, which gives you a decent amount of nitrous at a consistent rate, and this is actually useful on tracks that don't have a lot of corners. I find the auto-charge nitrous to remove one of the most fun gameplay elements from the game though, so I didn't really find myself using it. In Ridge Racer 6, they actually had reverse charge as a race type, and I wish this would have made a return. I'm kinda sad that they removed the entire race type and just added it as an option that most people probably wouldn't even use. Another pretty big element of the game is slipstreaming. Whenever you're behind somebody, you can slipstream them to get a little bit extra speed, but you can actually do this from pretty far back, and this is crucial in some of the harder races in the game where if you don't slipstream, you'll just get left behind by the AI. And this mechanic is so important that it actually takes up just about as much UI space as the nitrous itself. Once you start stringing together, once you start properly stringing together drafting, nitrous, and multiple corners, it starts becoming a muscle memory that you develop over time. At the beginning of the game, the controls feel really stiff and awkward, but by the end of it, it feels like you're pretty much just bending the game to your will. Once you get towards the end of the game and you found the favorite cars you like to drive and you set them up the way that you like, it almost becomes a therapeutic experience driving them all. And once you start memorizing the tracks and memorize where to actually hit the nitrous, it almost becomes second nature. I think this is accentuated by the fact that whenever you start this game, it's almost a dreamlike experience. When you start the game, you have the option of playing a 1983 game called Xevious. It's actually pretty fun in its own right, and I can see why it ate up a bunch of quarters back in the day. After that, you're introduced to a pretty dreamy intro, which honestly feels like it was filmed in a liminal space.
Ridge Racer.
I don't know why, but I'm really drawn to its airy, desolate feeling that it gives me. You also get to see the cover car of the game, which is probably the wrong car to advertise the game in my opinion, but I mean, what do? I don't work in marketing. Once you hit the start button, the game pretty much slaps you in the face with its atmosphere. This is the type of music that I would expect to hear when the rapture's happening. The UI in this game is perfect. It feels like every square inch of the screen has been combed over with an expertise that is rarely found in other games. It feels like every single element of the UI is completely intentional and nothing is out of place. This combined with the music makes it feel like you're stepping into another world. Once you get in game, the style doesn't stop either. The UI looks just as stylish as the menu, and one thing that I absolutely love about this game is the speedometer is different on every type of car. Just like how in real life, where every single company has a unique design for a speedometer, the same thing applies to Ridge Racer. Also, whenever you get engine upgrades, those also show up in the speedometer, adding to that immersion. Now, what would a racing game be without the cars? Ridge Racer doesn't feature any real-world cars, but instead use fictionalized cars that have their own companies with their own sets of lore attached to them. One of my favorite aspects about how this game does world building is how it delivers new cars to you. Whenever you unlock a new car, the company will hand deliver it to you on some sort of transport device, and every single one of these levels are completely unique. I think it's really cool that every one of these cutscenes shows you a bit of the personality from each manufacturer. It also does a great job of showcasing some of the excellent art design in this game. Every time I get one of these cutscenes, I just want to take it all in, not just to see the car, but the environment itself. It's like a spectacle every time it happens. This, combined with the music, makes it feel like a true event every time you get a new car. Right now, I'm going to go over the car's visual appearance and also how they perform in the game. Now, the first car that you're likely to use in the game is the Kamada Fiera. The Fiera is a pretty low tier car at first, but can be used in any category through upgrades. I think the visual design is actually really good, and I think it's actually aged really well. I think it's pretty uncanny how similar the Kamada Fiera looks to a modern Nissan Z. This was one of my favorite cars to drive in the game, and I also think it has some of the best body kit options that you can pick from. Next up is the Aj Prophecy. This is kind of like the early game alternative to the Fiera, and while I don't think the visual design is quite as strong, I think it does drive pretty much just about as well, and if you like the way this car looks, I would pick this one over the Fiera, and I don't think you'd be missing much at all. I think the visual design of the Prophecy is actually pretty unique. I can't think of any real-world car that looks like this, even today. Aj also makes a hatchback, and while I didn't actually drive this car during my playthrough of the game, I do really like the visual design of this car. Just like the Prophecy, this car looks pretty unique, and I can't point to any real-world examples that this car draws inspiration from. The Danford Bayonet seems to be the game's option for an American car in the early game, and just like the stereotype that most American cars have, this car handles awfully. I honestly hated driving this car, and even adding a bunch of different body kit options and different performance options, I couldn't really get it driving the way that I wanted it to. I do think the visual design is quite good though. It looks kind of like a Dodge Viper, and maybe that's a bit more retro-futuristic. Another car that I didn't find myself driving too often was the Nod Esperanza. Now, I actually really liked how this car drove, but I didn't really discover it until the later stages of the game. One thing that I don't really like about this car is it doesn't have a lot of body kit options, and I also don't really like the speedometer that this car has, but despite that, I do think it's actually a quite good looking car, and I think it's aged pretty well too. Okay, next up, we have potentially the first controversial looking car of the whole video, and that's the Kamada RC410. The ironic thing, this is actually the cover car for the game, and I'm still not sure how I feel about it looks-wise. I think it's really just the front end of the car that looks questionable though. I think the rear looks just fine, and that's what you see when you're actually driving the car. I found myself using this car quite a bit, and I really liked how it handled. The Himmel EO may be the only car in the game that actually has a real-world comparison point that you can make. It looks pretty similar to a Porsche Cayman. While I think this is actually one of the best handling cars in the game, it's just too slow to use for some of the faster events. While I think it'll get you through the main story just fine, doing some of the harder challenges in the game is pretty much impossible with this car. I think this is the only car in the game that feels significantly slower than every other car in its category. On to more questionable looking cars, we have the Sin-Swang Motor Zuzak. This car just looks off to me. I don't like the wheels, I don't like the front end, and the rear end has awkward proportions too. I think every angle of this car is just awkward to me. And to top it all off, it doesn't drive very well either. It's very sensitive, and it likes to go into big drifts way too easily. I pretty much used this car as a guinea pig to try out different body kits for the different events in the game. Okay, so the following two cars, I'm actually going to group together because they're pretty much the same thing. Assoluto has two supercars in the game called the Fatalia and the Bissonette. These cars are really similar to each other, performance-wise and looks-wise. I pretty much only used the Bissonette. I thought the Fatalia looks a little weird from the back, and the Bissonette drove a little bit better in my opinion too, so I didn't really have a reason to ever go back to the Fatalia. I think these two cars are some of the most iconic cars from the game, and most people that play this game will probably finally remember these. I bet if you put either of these cars on a poster, most people wouldn't even realize it's a fictional car to begin with. The Soldat Miltfire was probably my most used car throughout the entire game. I don't know what it was, but the first time I drove this car, it just felt like it was tuned perfectly. It feels like it's one of the most agile cars in the game, and I could outmaneuver some of the Assoluto cars. This combined with the top speed makes it one of the most dominant cars in the game. The only downside to this car is it doesn't generate nitrous as fast as the Assoluto cars, so the Assoluto cars might be better for some specific time trials. I don't think this car looks as good as the Assoluto cars though. I don't think it's aged as well, and it definitely looks a lot more dated in my opinion. I think it looks a lot better when you put a body kit on it, and I think the rear view actually looks pretty good, but the front end looks a little uninspired to me. Soldat makes another car, which is the Raggio, which is probably the other most iconic car in the game. The Raggio is honestly one of the best looking cars in the entire game. I think it's aged exceptionally well, and I think it looks more modern than some of the supercars available right now. This might be my favorite designed car in the entire game. I really like every angle of it, and I can't really find a bad one. It has one massive downside in my opinion. It drives absolutely terribly. This is one of those dynamic drift cars which is really hard to control, and I never really felt like this car actually felt like it was good to drive. My ideal car in this game would be a car that drives like the Meltfire, but looks like the Raggio. Now, I'm not saying that you can't do well with this car, and some of you might even actually like driving this car, but every time that I drove this car, I had to concentrate a lot more than I did with every other type of car in the game. Alright, next up, I'm going to do a hit list of all the cars that I either didn't drive or thought was too ugly to even try. The first one is the Nod Magnifico, and while I really like the name, this car just looks way too awkward to me. I don't really like any of the body lines, and I think every angle of the car looks bad. I don't like the wheels, I don't like the headlights, I don't like the roofline. The entire car should just be thrown into the bin. The Danfor Hijack is a pickup truck. I shouldn't even have to go into explanation, that should be all I have to say. I mean, I'm on a racetrack going 250 miles an hour sideways. Why would I want to drive a pickup truck? The worst part is, I don't even think it does the one thing that a pickup truck does well, which is have a big, manly appearance. It looks really rounded, and I don't really like the way it looks at all. The Terrazzi Centelli is so bad, it's kinda boring. I hate the rear end, I hate the line on the side of the car, I hate the way the front end looks, I don't like the way the roof line looks. I think the whole car just looks bad, and I never really wanted to look at it. Now, I thought that Terrazzi Starnose would kind of be like a Caterham, would be like a really super tight, nimble car that was really easy to maneuver, but instead, it's a really unwieldy car that's really hard to get pointing in the direction they actually want to go. I was really put off by this, and I didn't really like this car, so I pretty much just wrote it off and never even tried messing around with the setup. The final production car in the game is the Terrazzi Wild Gang, and this is another car which I don't really understand. The visual design is really awkward and it's cute, bubbly, and weird, but you're supposed to use it to go 190 miles an hour sideways. I just don't really like how it looked, and I couldn't really take the game seriously if I ever picked this car. I think it's also pretty telling that this car is consistently in last place whenever you're doing large races. A lot of the brands and the cars in this game actually come from previous Ridge Racer games. Things like the Kamada Fiera have been in every Ridge Racer since Ridge Racer 5, and a lot of the cars in this game are actually like series staples. Now, all cars in this game all have the same problem. Every single car in the game has the exact same engine audio sound. They're displayed at different pitches. So it doesn't matter if you're driving a hatchback which supposedly has a 2-liter 4-cylinder or a V8 supercar, every single car in the game sounds the exact same. And ironically, I think the default car that you get, the Kamada Fiera, actually is the best sounding car that you will hear in the entire game.
Three, two, one, go!
Okay, let's go!
This is a huge disappointment to me because I feel like the way these cars look and the way that they're designed and the amount of care and attention they put into them, they deserve to have good audio to actually back that up. This is a pretty big drawback to me, but luckily, the soundtrack in this game more than makes up for this. The soundtrack is one of the best soundtracks I've ever heard in any piece of media I've ever heard of, and this game honestly features some of my favorite songs. Even if you're not interested in the game itself, I would highly recommend that you listen to the soundtrack, as it sounds like you're listening to a full feature-length album with over 30 songs. I honestly think the music is the best part of the entire game. It was like you were buying a really extensive audio mix of a bunch of different trance and electronic music, and it just so happened to come with a really good arcade racing game that you could play in the background. All of the music in this game is electronica, and there's a really good variety of subgenres that feature in the game. A lot of the tracks in this game have an airy, ethereal presence to them, which really adds to the gliding feeling whenever you're drifting. These are great background tracks, and they're really good if you're trying to study or get some work done. There's also a lot of faster paced, more hardcore electronic songs, and these are some of my favorite songs in the game. I found myself listening to these outside of the game, and I honestly couldn't get enough of them. I actually found these songs get stuck in my head, and they were pretty much playing on loop whenever I tried to go to bed after playing the game. Honestly, there's not that many songs that I don't like in the game. Even the menu music is absolutely perfect to me. I found myself downloading a lot of the songs just for personal enjoyment, and I listened to them in the car, or when I was at the gym, or when I was working on something. I really liked the variety of the soundtrack, and towards the end of the game, there was still playing new songs that I hadn't heard in the game yet. If you're a fan of electronic music, especially during the 2000s, I cannot recommend the soundtrack enough. It is some of my favorite music that I've ever listened to, period, and this applies to pretty much every Ridge Racer game that I've played. The best part is, if you like this type of music, there's more of the same in Ridge Racer 6. Overall, this is one of the best soundtracks I've heard in any piece of media, period, and you probably heard a lot of these songs on other YouTube videos. I think once you play this game and you beat it, and especially play the special events, this music will stay with you for years to come. So the last thing that I want to talk about is the Extreme Battles. Now, this game has 3 different events in the main RSGP. You have the main Grand Prix, of course, and once you complete that, you can start knocking out some of the single events. Now, these are some special races that have special rules where you have to have reverse charge nitrous, or no nitrous at all, or maybe use a car that only has stock parts, and these are pretty easy, and I never really found that any of the events in the single events or the RSGP were particularly challenging, but that completely changes once you get to the Extreme Battles. Now, but towards the end of the game, I'll be honest, I thought most of the events were pretty brain dead easy, but I know some people struggled a lot more with them than I did, so I'll say your mileage will vary. In the one-on-one duels though, you have to utilize every single game mechanic the game has, or you're just gonna lose. You have to use slipstreaming, you have to time your nitrous absolutely perfectly, and you have to drift every corner to get as much nitrous as you possibly can. Now, the first few duels aren't too bad. The base cruiser and the limo, those guys are pretty quick, but once you figure out how they're going to drive, it's pretty easy to catch them and pass them. The problem is the Angel and the Devil duel. These 2 duels are some of the 2 hardest races in any game ever, right up there with the final races of Midnight Club 2. I remember the first time I played through the game, I actually got really lucky and got through these duels on my first or second try. The good friend of mine that actually convinced me to give this game another try was actually super impressed that I was able to do this and almost couldn't believe it. The problem is, I'm learning that I got super lucky. I picked the exact right parts that I needed in my first playthrough of the game. I never really thought the different body kit parts or the different performance parts actually made that much of a difference, and it's pretty much just personal preference. That's actually not the case at all. The different body kit parts can massively change how your car drives, and the different engine and nitrous can completely change how you gain nitrous and how fast you get to top speed. Once I put on an engine that accelerated a bit faster and I changed my nitrous type, I was able to beat the duel within about 5 or 10 minutes. If you're ever thinking the game is too easy during the RSGP, just do some of the extreme battles and your opinion will be changed really quickly. It's like the game lures you in with a false sense of security. The colorful graphics, the cheery music, the nice cars, it all lures you in with the sense that everything's going to be okay and that you can just sit back and relax. Next thing you know, you're doing the gamer lean trying to analyze every single pixel of the track surface trying to gain an advantage, and trying to wonder where your nitrous timing went wrong. Now, throughout the game, one thing that I really like about it is how it rewards you for sticking with certain manufacturers. So, if you drive the Kamada Fiera a lot, for example, you'll eventually actually start building a relationship with Kamada themselves. They'll start inviting you out to events, and once you actually hit maximum reputation with them, they'll start giving you a discount on any future purchases you make with them. I would actually recommend looking up and seeing which manufacturers do what, because the game doesn't tell you this, and you don't unlock some of the rewards until the very end of the game. You can get stuff like additional colors or additional arcade modes where you can have unlimited nitrous. At the end of the day, Ridge Racer 7 is one of the best arcade racing games I've ever played. It has really fun, colorful, pretty graphics, it has a really good soundtrack, it has really good addictive gameplay, and when this game was active, it must have had some of the most fun multiplayer you could ever experience. It also feels like it's absolutely dripping in style no matter where you look at this game. The main menus, the loading screens, the pre-race starts, the actual tracks themselves, the cars, the music. Everything about this game feels like it had a care and attention put into it that you just won't find in modern racing games. I wish they would keep making Ridge Racer games, and I'm really sad that they don't use them as technological showcases for what a new console can do anymore. After this game came out, the series kind of whimpered and died. About 7 years after this game came out, there was a game for the PS Vita that showcased the power of the handheld. It wasn't really received very well by the critics or the people who actually bought the game. There was also Ridge Racer Unbounded, which was actually developed by the Flatout developers Bugbear. It doesn't really share anything in common with any of the other Ridge Racer games, and it seems like it was cashing in on the trend set by Split Second and Blur, where it was set in a more dense city center, and it was a lot more destruction focused. This completely alienated actual Ridge Racer fans, and people that were new to the series thought it was just an inferior product to the other two games that I just mentioned. That's kind of been it. Ridge Racer 7 was really the last flash of brilliance we've seen from this great franchise. It's kind of a shame because Ridge Racer pioneered racing games in a 3D environment, and it's kind of sad to not see an alternate reality where they were making games alongside Need for Speed. But hey, don't be sad that it's over, be happy that it happened at all.